Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to The Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. No mai, haere mai, welcome in to The Hoon. I'm Bernard Hickey, a co-host, along with Peter Bale, co-host from the other side of the planet. How are you, Peter?
I'm good, Bernard. It's really good to see you. Thank you. I mean, I've got up, and you've told me the news because it's 7 in the morning where I am, and I've seen this news about Charlie Kirk being assassinated in the United States, and I'm sort of plugging in and getting ready to find out how things. I thought the Tom Phillips story was big enough until that happened.
Yes, well, that's one story I haven't actually covered or touched. It's one of those ones where, when you're a journalist and you see a big story breaking, you think, oh, that's something I should jump onto or something I should do. And then I realize there's nothing at all I can add, and there are a gazillion other people doing it. I should beetle off into my own quiet patch and try and dig up something no one else has seen. But that is the most extraordinary story. It really transfixed the nation for days. But this Charlie Kirk assassination today in the United States. I mean, you lived in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years, and, in that world of media and politics and the like. How big is this, if you have never heard of the name Charlie Kirk before?
Bernard. I mean, it's sort of blindingly obvious that it's really enormous, because what it's going to allow is the backlash from Trump, and we've already seen that in his comments this morning about pursuing the people who've committed this atrocity, as he's called it, which of course it is, and the people who financed it, which I would take to be a open door to tackling some of the long held kind of critics of Trump. I would say that people like George Soros and so on will come into focus about their funding of left-wing in the United States, or democratic or liberal organizations. There's going to be the most extraordinary crackdown here, and I think it'll be really ugly. I think also, and one never wishes ill on people, but Charlie Kirk was a pretty obnoxious, nasty, harsh, cruel person, and he's emblematic of MAGA, but also emblematic of a slightly more sophisticated MAGA. He's really has, Turning Point America has really unified a younger side of MAGA and very much the masculine male side of MAGA. Almost the incel side of MAGA, if you like. But it's he was a not a very pleasant person in all of his public utterances, his generation of hate, which of course does not excuse an assassination of any kind, whether it's the attempted assassination of Trump last July or this. But this just shows again the really darkness of the climate that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of amazing obviously I try not to listen to people like this in their regular chats. Apart from anything else, it hurts my brain and makes me unhappy. And I've spent way too much time being deeply online and now starting to understand how corrosive and mentally unhealthy it is. But this guy's living online. He's grown up online. He is saying the things that flash into his head to everyone, and he's saying it using platforms and in ways that mean he reaches enormous amounts of people and motivates people, because it seems the way the algorithms work, it seems to focus and broadcast that sort of angry, reactionary, hateful stuff in a much more virulent and aggressive way than, if I was preaching the joys of daffodils.
Oh, yes. Well, I didn't expect the conversation to go in the direction of daffodils there, but yeah, I mean, it just shows the climate that we're in. And again, we've talked about this before. We are living in Philip Roth's book, The Plot Against America, we have the right-wing character from that time, who was an America First character. Charles Lindbergh is the Prime Minister in a sense, although Trump, of course, hasn't flown across the Atlantic for the first time. But these, this is a very dark climate. You've got troops on the ground in National Guard troops on the ground in Washington, the threat of putting them into Chicago, and this threat in Utah, or assassination in Utah, is going to spread that kind of anger, upset, and contention right to the center of the country.
Yeah, and watch the space, unfortunately. And we'll see how it all develops. I worry a bit about it. This week, we're going to be talking to Catherine about climate, big conference here in New Zealand, and lots of
excuse me, Ben.
And lots of discussion about what's going on with government policy and climate itself. Then we'll have Robert Patman to talk about what's happened in Gaza, what's going on in Ukraine and Poland, which shocked everyone this week.
And Qatar.
Yes, and oh my goodness, yes. It's almost as if everyone's being bombed or shot or flown over at the moment. Luckily, except for us, perhaps. And then from 5:40 we'll have Shamabeel Jacob, independent economist, now working as the chief economist for Simplicity, and the producer of many excellent reports, including one this week on health and safety. So that'll be fun.
And Bernard, do you have a soliloquy this week?
No, not yet. It's brewing. It's brewing. It's brewing. We'll save it for later. But the other thing I was keen to ask you about, given your time in the orbit, is this extraordinary story this week about Rupert Murdoch, his family, and a couple of $3 billion worth of payouts, I think, to try to get people to talk to each other.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, Bernard, and his as usual. Rupert gets what Rupert wants, which was actually the headline on a story I wrote, or a profile I wrote about him some years ago when I was at the FT, and he has sorted out this family problem or problem amongst his kids by throwing a gigantic amount of money at all of the mature kids. I must admit I haven't quite looked at what Chloe and the other daughter that he had with Wendy Deng have got out of this, but essentially, James, Elizabeth, Prudence come out of this with even more money than they already had. But the important thing, of course, is that it leaves Lachlan in control of the company for the foreseeable future. The other kids are being kind of moved out of any responsibility, which, of course, protects, as Rupert would see it, the company from James, really in particular. And I was reminded this week, actually, that when James Murdoch presided over the hacking affair in the UK, or failed, in fact, to understand it and provide it and do anything about it, she was, according to Michael Wolff, heard to say at a party, "He's fucked the company." And now the reverse has happened to them. So essentially, Lachlan is in charge. We can expect. I mean, he's a little bit younger even than you and me, Bernard. We can expect, with Rupert at I think 97 now.
94, I think. Yep.
94. It's going to go on for a long time in that direction of Fox. And of course, if you think about it, Fox has created the climate in the United States to some extent, or exploited the climate that has led to today's other big news, or the rise of Charlie Kirk, the rise of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I don't think we'd have a President Donald Trump without Fox News and without Rupert Murdoch's intervention there. I mean, he single-handedly goes in there and does to America exactly what he did to the United Kingdom, which is to totally change the political and economic landscape in many ways through the purchase and creation of media. He did it with the purchase of and the revitalisation of The Sun, and the growth, the Times, B-Sky B, all of that, and then did it all over again with Fox News, and in a much more sort of dangerous and
Yeah, on the other hand, what
way.
he's done is he's given a voice to a part of society that wasn't there, Bernard. He's given conservatives a voice. So they were all in the UK. It was all establishment, and of course, as we know from him, he's never asked a prime minister for anything.
Yeah, but they've begged him for many things. Yeah, and Catherine. It is Catherine. Lovely to see you, Catherine. How are you?
Kia ora, good, thank you.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about the world's events, and there's no event more important in the long run than the growth of emissions and the warming of the planet. And this week there's been a big conference in New Zealand. This is the flagship conference where everyone who thinks about climate, business, what's going on in government gets together and tries to encourage each other to keep going. But also, debate the issues. I actually chaired this conference a couple of years ago. It has been for a long time chaired by Rod Oram. Unfortunately, now not with us. But could you tell us about some of the events at this conference and what it says about our debate about climate?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I wasn't at the conference myself, so I've been hearing about it. There's been a lot of talk on social media, on LinkedIn, and some newspaper articles written about it as well. And the thing that has stood out really strongly is the notion that the government and the corporate world are in different places on the issue of climate change. I mean, in a really interesting way. So the politicians had a panel. So can you guys still hear me? Because it's saying my recording has stopped.
That's interesting. Stop recording, something. If you could go out and come back in again, that would be great.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. With just a plain old Chrome browser. Yep. Cool. So Catherine's just going out.
While Catherine's doing that, what's happened with the David Seymour breaking ranks maybe 10 days ago, and we discussed it in last week's Hoon about calling about a review of the Paris Agreement. Not that New Zealand's going to be able to generate that. So what's been the reaction on the David Seymour side of things?
Yeah, well, obviously the Prime Minister said that's not going to happen. We don't want to punish farmers. And in theory, that's gone away, but of course it hasn't. New Zealand First jumped in and said, "Oh, we want to do that too." And the Prime Minister's reaction, which was essentially, it's economically bad for us to pull out of Paris, really just further dilutes his commitments and any conviction about real action. So for now, we stay in Paris. I suspect that the underlying tone with the current government on Paris is just keep quiet about it until it all blows up and everyone else leaves and we can quietly leave without getting hurt too badly.
Yeah. Slow followers rather than leaders. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is becoming quite intense now, in particular since America hiked our tariffs to 15%, took us out of line with Australia and a whole bunch of others. And now, the pressure is on for us to come up with free trade agreements and freer trade agreements and to keep the ones we've got. The big two, of course, the FTAs with the EU and the UK, both depend on us doing the right thing on climate. And Catherine, you mentioned that the conference has showed this difference of view, trajectory on climate between the government and business, which, again, illustrates the problems we have.
Yeah, a couple of things that occur to me there. I mean, one, I think, is that there are some businesses, particularly in the finance and banking world, who have done a lot of work around understanding climate transition costs as well as climate risk, and are looking further ahead in terms of how you balance those things. And so those sorts of organisations are much more, in favour of a more responsible approach by the government. I think where things differ a little bit with the government is this government in particular seems to be particularly sensitive to lobbying, and the types of companies that lobby are typically your more extractive industries, and the ones that are doing something that's not in the public good, and so they have this need to try and get the government to do what they want them to do rather than what the public wants them to do. That's a really broad generalisation, but that's kind of, and I think that those were not necessarily the kinds of organisations that were at that conference in Auckland. They don't go to climate change conferences on the whole, but they seem to be the ones, this is more your primary industries that have the ear of this government. And so it's interesting to see that starting to break open a little bit, where you've got these two different kind of sets of interests that are competing and that are looking to have a different response to climate change.
Yeah, there's some very good reportage in a way and interpretation of what happened at the conference via Newsroom, firstly through Mark Dulder, who's done an excellent report on what happened in this now legendary panel discussion between politicians of all sides, in which essentially they said that the public don't want to pay for climate change action, but someone will, just not us. And the main thing we want to do is dig the gravel out of the riverbeds so that we don't get hurt by floods, build more seawalls so that we don't get hurt by rising sea levels, and whatever we do, make sure that double cab ute drivers vote for us. And it was interesting, there was a lot of squabbling that went on there between the parties. And later on, Rod Carr, Dr. Rod Carr, former chair of the Reserve Bank, and of course the chair of the Climate Change Commission up until last year, made some comments. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, he said that the panel where the politicians were talking to each other were acting like a bunch of squabbling toddlers, was the words that he used, which is basically saying there's very little alignment across political parties, so there's no bipartisan agreement on where we need to go, which is incredibly worrying for the future, that at this point in time that there is still so little agreement on what actually needs to be done. That's really worrying. And I think even when you look beyond that, if you look at, where you might expect to see more action from Labour, for instance, even they don't seem to have a very clear message about what they want to do.
Yes,
Catherine, it's really interesting the extent to which this is coming from the public as well. You might have seen this week the Times in London had a really interesting story saying that the percentage of the British public who are sceptical about climate change and believe it's been overplayed has doubled in the past 4 years, and very few British people appear to be ready to go along with the idea of abandoning diesel and petrol vehicles along with in the current deadline. So I think this whole net zero scare story is getting real traction. So presumably that is coming out in the polling and private polling as well in New Zealand and many other countries. I mean, it's a real sentiment thing perhaps coming from the public rather than from top down, although, as you say, being also promoted by lobbyists.
Multiple countries and found that the vast majority of people were in favour of climate action and prepared to pay for it through, but they tend to think that their neighbours don't think the same way and that they're alone on the issue. And I think that's a point at which disinformation and people using disinformation and misinformation networks are really good at wedging into those kind of sensitivities where people think, well, I'm the only one that thinks that way, and if I'm the only one that's going to act, I don't think that things are going to work out. So I can see the likelihood that misinformation is starting to have an impact on what people are prepared to pay for, and that is worrying as well. I mean, I think that it's acting against a background of the majority of people really understanding what climate change is and what needs to happen, but just not having confidence in either politicians or their neighbours to go along with it. And that's that misinformation gap, or that gap there between the reality and how people understand it. We really need to do a better job of communicating in that space.
That's incredibly well put, Catherine. Thank you.
It's also interesting that you need all sorts of voices out there spreading useful and factual information, and often it's you can actually have a lot of good information put out there by companies in the form of advertising, and that's why I thought it was interesting this week to see Marks and Spencer, one of these brands which probably is more globally known than it probably should be, given its relatively small size as a company. But tell us about what they're saying in their ads in the UK and why it's of interest to us here.
Yeah, well, actually, this was Marks and Spencer looking towards developing the strategy for the future, and they've come out with a strategy that's called Farm Plan A, I think, or something along those lines. And so they're saying that they are really going to focus on working with local regenerative farmers in the UK. So they are going to stock agricultural products that come from local farmers, and they are also pushing for the government to develop a food security strategy, and that's something that's getting increasing traction globally as well, in the sense that as we start to see more and more impacts from climate change that affect crop growing and that affect agricultural production, countries are looking around and going, well, if there is going to be a shortage in the future, then we better make sure that we have our own supply, and that our food is secure, our food supply is secure in the future. So those are some really strong signals that are going to start to make a difference to our trading opportunities and to what's happening in the market externally. There was also something quite recently that came up, trying to remember where it was now, but they were talking about precision fermentation and its potential impact on milk powder in particular. And given that we've seem to be putting all of our eggs into that particular basket, we are, particularly at risk of things happening in that space internationally.
Yeah, eggs in particular and baskets are really important in this because climate change creates bird flu.
You can't make an omelette without breaking a few of them as well.
No, you can't. And, if you don't have enough chickens because they've all died of a climate-related flu, we're in deep trouble. The other thing, and you're right about food security, something New Zealanders don't think about much. We think of ourselves as this very productive place. We've got farmers all over the place. And the farmers often tell us, hey, we're feeding 40 million people in the world. Don't mess with us. But of course, there's an excellent report out this week from the Salvation Army pointing out, yes, we might feed 40 million in the world totally, but there's 1 million people in New Zealand who are in food insecurity. And 30% of kids report being hungry or not having enough or the right food every year. And we have currently 600,000 people who are reliant at one point or another during the year on food parcels. And one of the great sort of problems here is that, yes, we're incredibly productive, but it's our systems and the way that we distribute our food and price it and has meant that 1 in every 5 people in New Zealand, and disproportionately our children, don't have enough to eat. And it's stunning to me that we've allowed ourselves to get ourselves into this position.
Yeah, and there's also been studies done that look at, if there was some kind of catastrophic event that stopped the ships from coming to New Zealand, how would we survive? And that's not as easy or as simple or as set up as we might like to think it would be. There would be a very real risk of people going hungry in the short term or starving in the short term. So we really need strategies here. We need strategies around food security, and we need strategies around, what are we doing with our export markets if we're focusing so much on some very at-risk, markets in the future.
That's right. Energy security as well. And in fact, they're the same story, you could argue, because if we can wean ourselves off fossil fuels, we won't have to worry about the ships turning up.
Yep. And we also won't have to export as much milk powder in order to pay for the petrol that we need to import for our cars. There's
That's right. And not to mention
a virtuous circle there.
not to mention the millions of tons of coal we're having to import to dry the milk powder. But anyway, that's another issue. Catherine, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Lovely to see you again.
If only someone in New Zealand had a podcast with a climate expert on it to come in and tell us what's really happening.
Yep,
we'd be combating all the misinformation.
That's right. We can do more of these podcasts, and we will get there in the end.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And speaking of which, here's Professor Patman to tell us what's really going on in the world from Dunedin. We were just talking, Robert, with Catherine about the spread of misinformation and disinformation about climate change and the extent to which that's changing public opinion against net zero and the Paris Agreement. The other thing I was really struck by, and I think I said this to you in a note yesterday, Robert, was this attack on Qatar during the week from Israel. It was another one of these, extraordinary, audacious Israeli moves like Entebbe and various other things that they've done over the decades. But it's a little bit. One might be slightly cautious about entering into international negotiations with Israel anywhere at the moment, wouldn't you? If the negotiating teams are going to be they're going to try and pick them off straight away.
Well, good evening, Peter, and good evening, Bernard. It's great to be with you guys. Yes, I think it's the sixth occasion when the Netanyahu government in the last 22 months or so has flagrantly breached international law and not respected the sovereignty of a country in which it has unleashed one of these attacks. From Netanyahu's point of view, the attempted assassination of the Hamas negotiating team, it appears that he didn't wholly succeed in that enterprise, but he certainly killed 5 senior members of Hamas and killed a Qatari security official, which probably is linked to the fury that we've seen emerging from Doha. But there's 2 immediate things that strike me about this. Firstly, it brings an abrupt halt to any prospect of a ceasefire in Gaza in the near future. Secondly, it basically wins Netanyahu some more time, gives him domestic breathing space. He's under a lot of pressure. We've spoken about this in previous Hoons. There are real signs that domestic opposition to Netanyahu has escalated. And I think in a sense, he's diffused some of that pressure by breaking off the negotiations that are going on. While those negotiations are going on, he's under a lot more pressure. If he's got a pretense for breaking them off, or he's got a reason not to pursue them, then I think that suits his own domestic political agenda. And it's all about survival, I think, with Netanyahu. And he's a great survivor, as both his supporters and his critics acknowledge in Israel, a bit of a master of Israeli politics. And the fact that he's been in power for so many years at different times, I think, is testimony to that. But I think it was Ori Goldberg, an astute Israeli commentator, remarked in the last 24 hours, Israel's security is paying a big price for Mr. Netanyahu's survival, or words to that effect. He's making the point that there's a big price for what's going on.
I wonder, Robert.
Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
I wonder, Robert, how that internal opposition to Netanyahu in Israel could emerge, and whether, in particular, the use of all of these effectively draftees or compulsory service people, the mobilisation of so many people in civilian life, whether there's any prospect of a revolt there that could really cause him trouble.
Well, I think the Trump administration hold the key to that. It is interesting that it does seem the Trump administration, while not willingly to openly condemn the Netanyahu assault in Doha, said it wasn't happy at all with any aspect of it, said publicly that it didn't know it was going to happen until 10 minutes before it did, or words to that effect, and also said, somewhat pointedly, it won't happen again. And I think the reason that the Trump administration is very frustrated is that I think they're beginning to realise that there is a major divergence between Netanyahu's political interests and that of the United States. It's taken a while to come to the surface. Of course, they do share much. Mr. Trump is completely relaxed about the prospect of Israel taking over Gaza and perhaps forcibly evicting 2 million people from that region or thereabouts. But I think he is concerned that this is going on, and I think that that comes into conflict with other agendas that Mr. Trump may have. But yeah, it's. I do think the Americans hold the key to this. There are signs that they have fallen out in the past. In Trump's first administration, Netanyahu and Trump fell out. They certainly repaired their relationship while Biden was in power, and they've been pretty close since the second Trump administration has been in the White House. But as we know from Mr. Trump, things can change and change quickly. So there is, I suppose, that would be a reassessment by the United States that it can no longer give unqualified support to Israel is the key, I think, to unleashing the domestic opposition to Netanyahu, because Netanyahu
I don't think that's going to happen. But
I don't think it's going to happen.
I mean, you're
either.
the professor, and I'm just the.
No. I think you're
Mr.
absolutely
Crayfish,
right. I'm just going through the scenarios.
Yes.
I do think, should the administration seriously have a change of mind, that would, if you like, escalate the pressures on Netanyahu.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Robert, very much within your wheelhouse, as it were, is the effect of diplomacy of this attack. I mean, we've had the attacks by the United States and Israel literally on the negotiators in Iran. We've now had this attack, an unannounced attack on Qatar, on people in Qatar. Next up, it'll be Al Jazeera. We've got the United Nations General Assembly coming up, and the United States has prevented Mahmoud Abbas and the other Palestinian delegates from going there. This is a fairly dark phase for what we used to think of as diplomacy and multilateral action, isn't it?
It's a very dark phase, and it's made darker by the fact that many middle powers and small countries are still looking for Washington to hold their hand on crucial issues, and that extends to the Europeans. If you want to look at Ukraine, for example, that's still Mark Rutte in many respects exemplifies or personifies that lack of confidence, the ability and the inability for the Europeans to get together and say, look, Trump's never going to agree with us about facing down Putin, so we're just going to have to go ahead without the Americans. They can't quite take that step. All the time they're looking for some sort of backstop from the Americans. And you could say, by extension, countries like New Zealand and other countries, they seem to have endless patience with America rearranging the world for them in a very negative fashion. I mean, let's be quite clear. What you're talking about, Peter, is breaching fundamental principles of international relations, such as state sovereignty, non-interference in domestic affairs. At the moment, one of America's closest allies is acting with virtual impunity in the Middle East region. It doesn't hesitate to use force, preemptive force, on a regional basis. And America seems quite happy with that at the moment. But for the rest of many other players in the international arena, it is bad news. As I say, I think the way back is not to rely on the United States per se, because I don't think Mr. Trump shares the vision of diplomacy or any sort of international rules-based order. I think it's up to the other players to assert themselves and make it quite clear what they want, as opposed to having to constantly react to whether it's Putin, Xi Jinping, or Mr. Trump or Mr. Netanyahu. I mean, it is, you might say, well, that's fanciful, it'll never happen. Why not? These countries all have considerable leverage, but they're choosing not to use it. And in a sense, they may come down to a point of crude national interest where they have to start addressing some of their issues. And so you're right. Yeah. It's a dark moment, but I don't think all is lost. I think the vast majority of countries do want international relations, particularly trade and security, to be regularized by rules.
Yeah, Robert, just before we ask you about the next big upset to global diplomacy, particularly around Poland and NATO, what should our listeners and readers look at for the General Assembly? I mean, what are going to be the big issues there? And do you see this, as I increasingly do, as a potentially decisive moment for the future of the UN?
I think an interesting one might be whether the Arab countries who've been privately really upset with Israel for some time actually make public. I mean, it was interesting to me that Saudi Arabia and Qatar have had their differences in the past, but Saudi Arabia was quite outspoken in its defense of Qatar following the attack by Israel. It said it was completely unacceptable what Israel did, and was actually hinted that Israel was actually trying to undermine American peace initiatives via Qatar. So coming back to your question, at the UN General Assembly, it does take potentially middle powers like Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries to actually move from an abstract support for a two-state solution to saying we're just not going to accept Israel annexing the West Bank, and we're not going to accept annexing of Gaza. And what could bring something to a bit of a head is this flotilla of ships heading towards Gaza. Apparently it's about 50 or so. And I think, again, timing is everything in politics, but I do think there is we'll just have to wait and see. They may just, be limp and whinge and do nothing. But I do think a number of countries feel politics is often a choice between the disagreeable and the intolerable. I think the needle may be shifting now to the current situations becoming intolerable as opposed to just disagreeable. We'll see. But there is, if those countries decide enough is enough, they do have clout. Collectively, the majority of small and middle powers, particularly in the Middle East, if for example, Saudi Arabia and Egypt said to the United States, no, we're not putting up with this anymore. Now, it's very unlikely they'll do that because they're both dependent on the United States for their security. But they may put it in a way where, or at least articulate it publicly, which puts the Trump administration on the back foot, may raise questions which are already within the mega group about how much treasure should the United States expend on behalf of Israel. So, yeah, I mean, I think coming back to a question we've often discussed about, there are opportunities for diplomacy to become re-energized, but it's going to take political courage.
Bernard, you wanted to ask Robert about Poland.
Yes, Robert, what did you make of these dozen or more drones, Russian drones, accidentally, on purpose perhaps, straying into Polish territory and being shot down by Polish jets, creating a real scramble? What's going on here?
Polish and also Dutch F-35 jets, which had, interestingly, just been moved to Poland just to deal with such an eventuality. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate probing by Putin. Anybody who's watched him over the years and the way that regime acts knows that 19, perhaps 20 drones is, how should I put it? It was quite deliberate. It was premeditated. What's Putin doing? He's testing out the reactions of both Poland and its NATO allies, and he's probing. He wants to see how much pressure it can pile on Ukraine and by extension some of the neighbours. Putin's feeling the heat himself. Of course, in August alone, Russia lost 23% of its refining capability because of drone attacks. And that's going to have a cumulative impact going forward. So in a sense, it's not a one-way street, but I think coming back to your question, the question is, have NATO responded in a way that will convince Putin he mustn't do that again? I'm not sure.
So is there a risk here, Robert, that, things spiral out of control, one of these NATO jets or a Polish jet gets accidentally shot down or something, and before you know it, this is treated as an attack on one of the NATO members, because Poland's definitely in NATO.
Well, they've cited Article 4, haven't they? Which I think they all get together, not Article 5, Article 4, where all the members of NATO get together and have a consultation about a matter that affects the national interest of one member. So they cited Article 4. I think that's always been a possibility. For the moment, it was a very reckless invasion by Russia. There was always the possibility that as the conflict escalated and Ukraine showed considerable resistance, a stray drone or a stray missile, but this was not a stray 19 drones that lost
probing.
course.
Yeah.
Putin is testing things out, and I think it convinces many Europeans, not least the Dutch. The Dutch shot down at least 2 of the drones using F-35s. I think it convinces them ultimately that Putin. What does it say? It says that Putin is not interested in peace. It says 2 other things. It says Trump's diplomacy towards Putin has failed. Putin feels completely unconstrained by Mr. Trump in the White House, which of course is a big win as far as he's concerned. And secondly, it shows that appeasement, when you're dealing with an expansionist power like Mr. Putin's Russia, doesn't normally work. And I think this confirms it. The unpalatable inference of all this, I think, or implication, is that the Europeans at some point are going to have to say we're going to defeat Putin. Because
just imagine
they don't want to say that, but that's what they're going to have to do.
Yeah, Robert, just imagine what Trump's reaction is going to be if we have to invoke Article 5.
Yeah, well, it probably wouldn't be pretty.
Yeah, Robert, thank you so much for coming onto the show again. It's lovely to see you.
Good to see you guys.
We shall do our best to supply you with lots of news for next week.
No worries. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Fantastic. Bye. We're now joined by economist
Shamabil
Jacob. We've got Shamabil on the line. He's the chief economist for Simplicity, but of course many of our listeners and readers will know him from many excellent reports and appearances and views on our economy and beyond. Shamabil, lovely to see you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Bernard. Nice to see you again.
Yeah. So, Shamabil, you put out a really interesting report this week. This is via the Health and Safety Forum, which, for those who don't know, is a group of businesses, large and small, who have to think a lot about health and safety. I think it was put together in the mid-2010s under John Key, and has been really effective at focusing attention on health and safety. It was part of that, I suppose you could call it, reaction to Pike River. And now they do an annual report, which you produce, called the State of a Thriving Nation, which I find a must read every year. I find I'm a bit of a tragic when it comes to economic reports, and this is a cracker. Shamabil, what does it say about Aotearoa's economy and how productive it is, and how that affects safety?
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. So the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum, as you said, kind of came off the back of the Pike River kind of tragedy. And the idea was to bring together those business leaders and to create an opportunity for them to come together and share lessons. But there was a bit of discomfort that they were doing the things inside of their own businesses, but we weren't seeing the improvement across New Zealand. Why is it that we're seeing this improvement in our own businesses, but not at a macro scale? And so that was the reasoning behind this report. And what we tried to do is put a dollar figure on the fatalities, the injuries, the illnesses that are caused by workplaces. Now, we take a very conservative approach, but roughly speaking, last year, those fatalities, injuries, and illnesses together cost us something like $5.4 billion. Now, it's a pretty big number. International studies put it at a much higher rate. So, you can kind of manufacture bigger numbers, but I don't think it needs to be that big. It's big enough. And the other thing that we did this time was not just look at the injuries and the costs, but we also thought about what would happen if we were to do things a little bit differently. Is it true that health and safety is a zero-sum game? That if we improve safety, that your productivity will fall, that you're spending and wasting money and nothing will happen? And what we found was, both through literature and interviews with New Zealand businesses, was done right, health and safety can actually be a source of innovation. And two, done right, you get improvements in both safety and in operational performance. And so it's really about the mindset of how we approach work as done rather than work as imagined. And it was a little bit of a reaction to, I think, the political imperative at the moment, which is saying red tape, red tape, red tape. That's the only reason why productivity is bad. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, it's a really interesting sort of jujitsu to this argument that, health and safety is just lots of high-vis vests and helmets. It's all performative. It just costs us money and gets in the way and stops me from driving my car fast down the road. But what you're actually saying here is if it's done well and treated like an investment, it helps you grow faster. Aren't we all about growth, growth, growth? And
well, it is, but I think it's not just doing things because you think it's going to help. You have to do things that actually address those critical risks, and you implement it in a way that actually makes sense in your own organization. So, look, I'm not going to say there isn't waste and bad ways of doing things in terms of health and safety. I think a lot of people do it in a performative way, and that's not good. So we should improve those things. But I guess there is that kind of underlying there's this little nugget that if you do take it seriously and you do think about implementing it, not just because it's for safety, but because it's better for your business, it's better for your people, it's better for the community, you can get those outcomes. But what we're really describing is a better business. We're not actually necessarily talking about better health and safety. We're talking about better leaders, better managers, and better cultures in organizations. So it's a little bit cute, I guess, to say that, but the reality is that that's what it comes down to. Good businesses just have really good leaders who just get on with it.
One of the other interesting things about the report I found was the detail about churn. So if you're in a business, churn is bad. If you've got lots of people coming in and going out, you're probably not doing well as a manager. You're probably not going to be as productive or as profitable as a company. And you've got a couple of numbers in this report which just made me weep, to be frank, because they felt true, but I hadn't really thought about them before, which is that 40% of our workforce have been in their jobs for less than a year. And of those people, only 10% had worked in that sector before. No wonder so many people are getting hurt on the job. And it just speaks to our sort of subcontracty, churn style economy. Yeah. So how did you come across that? And what do you think it says?
Yeah, well, it's surprising to me that people don't know this about our labor market. This is not a new phenomenon. In fact, we've had this phenomenon of churn in our workplaces for quite some time. So essentially, this is not including, I guess, self-employed. This is just looking at people in jobs. But essentially, in the last 12 months, 1 million people have started a new job. And because what we can see through the IDI data in particular is we can see where people are coming from. So if you think about industries like construction, the industries like agriculture, quite often what we're finding is there's a huge amount of people moving between industries. Now, there's nothing wrong with it because you want people to move if the opportunities are there, but it comes with some costs, right? When you start a new place, you're learning how to do the job, how to do it safely, how to do it productively. All of those things matter a great deal. Now, some of it is easily explained. For example, in agriculture, there's seasonality. So there'll be some churn that happens because of that. But nevertheless, my underlying concern, both from a safety perspective and from a productivity perspective, is if we have this huge amount of churn, it makes it very difficult to get those improvements. One interesting thing that I found when I was interviewing those businesses for this report was the businesses that had managed to do their safety right and all of those, they saw this improvement in their turnover. So one business had reduced their turnover from 30% to 10%. And the benefit they saw was not just that people were around and they're happier and those kinds of things, but their workplaces got more efficient because there was just so much more knowledge. They were able to make those incremental gains much more easily. So, there's this almost this hidden cost that's sometimes not seen. And we kind of think about it only as recruitment, but not in terms of the disruption and those other costs. So there's a whole bunch of different areas where I think we can see that as a catalyst, but also as one of the unseen benefits. If your workplaces and your work design is good, if the work is good, if the hours are predictable, if you're not out in the cold driving rain, but sitting inside in a cab or something, your workers are going to be much happier and it might be more effective. So again, it's sort of just taking that theory of safety and taking the theory of productivity and actually putting into place in terms of work as done versus work as imagined in the head office.
Now, that building and construction sector is so important in the economy, and you've also done a report with Rosie Collins last month for the New Zealand Chinese Building Industry Association, another annual report on the state of the building construction sector. What's the state of that sector at the moment in terms of employment, activity, momentum? Because, right now there's a lot of people looking around the economy going, gee, it just can't get going. What's going on?
Yeah, construction is pretty tough. And what we've seen is after, some spectacular years when we had practically free money through the COVID years, interest rates were so low, banks were lending so much money, the sector was just booming. That high was the highest we have ever seen. But the slowdown as a result has felt really tough. But also, if you look at the number of building consents, for example, residential consents today compared to the GFC, it's holding up at a relatively good level. So our bottom is higher than it was. So I know there's not a lot of optimism out there, and certainly the cyclical kind of story is pretty negative, but there is a structural story that's really positive. All those changes that were started under Twyford, carried on under Megan, and carried on with Bish, that supply improvement is really working. We still have way more building activity going on now than we have before. But there is a little bit of the translation problem, right? So buildings are being started, but they're getting started later. Once they get started, they're building them slower. So, the transition to completion is taking a bit longer. So when I'm looking at things like, new electricity meters, what we're seeing is that there is a huge amount of pent-up work. So when the money is available, when the confidence comes back, it's going to recover pretty strongly if we have enough workers. And I think that's the real risk right now, is not so much that whether the work will be there, because I think the work is still there. We still don't have enough homes. We still don't have enough infrastructure. But the labor shortages, and particularly skilled labor shortages, which the construction industry has a lot, right? From technical skills all the way up to people like engineers and planners. And those are the bits that I worry about. You saw the numbers yesterday from net migration. We're still exporting many of our good skilled people to Australia, and they ain't coming back.
Yeah. Shamabeel, may I ask you, it's Peter Bayo here, may I ask you a couple of questions? One is, who are you a proud supporter of? Because we can see the top of your T-shirt, but not the...
This is the National Kiwi Hatchery. We went to Rotorua for the school holidays a couple of holidays ago, and we saw brand new baby kiwis. It was spectacular.
Excellent. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, we had Catherine Dyer, our climate expert, on earlier in the show, talking about misinformation and disinformation around climate change, net zero, and she brought up the idea of the corporate responsibility. Even if politicians start to get a bit wobbly on this, that corporates have a role in communicating more effectively on this. There's a bit of a linkage I'm making, possibly a leap, between the health and safety gone mad culture and the net zero is too costly culture. And it becomes all of these cliches about cones and high vis and so on, and net zero is just going to be too expensive. What do you think about the role of corporates? I know you're at Simplicity now, but you understand this well. What is the role of the corporate sector in New Zealand as far as net zero and climate change goes?
Great question, Peter. And I think, can I answer it in a slightly meta way? So if I look at the state of trust in New Zealand in institutions, we don't trust media and government, but we do trust business and our employers. And so I think businesses have a responsibility and an opportunity to be able to speak more honestly and in a more long-term way about issues that matter. Certainly in the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum group, we found the business leaders have been quite vocal in terms of saying, look, if we're going to change health and safety policies, we should ensure that those policies actually improve safety outcomes. But if you look at the regulatory impact statement for the latest safety reforms, there's no link between the reforms and an improvement in safety. And you kind of go, so why are you improving? What are you doing? But I think the same thing applies for environment as well. And amongst not all, but many businesses, I'm seeing quite a lot of concern that we are moving away from that wider trajectory of corporate responsibility. And for them, the issue is not so much that they can't do business. It's more that there is so much pressure from up the supply chain. So, for example, if you think of a Fonterra, they have to do the bidding of their masters, of their clients in Europe, whose policies are far more advanced than ours. So even if our policies are falling behind, they still have to follow through. But we don't want to be in this weird situation where our businesses are essentially being moved about by external forces and divided and conquered. What we want is that ability for us to have that New Zealand approach to whatever it is that's consistent, that's coherent, and so that we can all get on with it. So, slightly convoluted answer to your question. The reason for that is, I think, we can't have the coordination function led by business. That is the purpose of government. The government collectivizes our ability for business and consumers to kind of put forward a national picture of how we're going to deal with climate change and the risks of climate change. Without government leadership, what we're going to find is pockets of excellence and some businesses that will absolutely get on with it, but there'll be a long tail of businesses who will not. And I think we're going to find it's going to be very topsy-turvy, stop-start kind of performance in this area, which just doesn't work.
Thank you very much for that. That's really a very, we let you go on that one a little bit because it was a really effective answer. Thank you. I think Sam Stubbs must be very fortunate to have such an effective voice at Simplicity. Bernard.
Yes, and one of the reasons I think Shamaville's so good on this is that he's done a lot of research on it with the Helen Clark Foundation, a research report that went out in April on social cohesion in New Zealand, which again talks about this issue of it's easier to get change done when people are a bit more together. Can you talk about how socially cohesive Aotearoa is at the moment and how that's affecting our ability to solve some of our problems?
Yeah, I mean, that work was quite eye-opening for me, Bernard. We were talking about this earlier in the week, and when I first designed the work and kind of got funding to do that work in New Zealand, my very strong prior was we would be better than Australia, because my feel was surely we're less racist than those guys. It turns out no. It turns out no, we're not. And so pretty much on every measure except for participation in protests, we were falling behind Australia. And it's not that our social cohesion is catastrophic, but our social cohesion is fraying. And certainly across most metrics, we're falling behind Australia. And the reason why I kind of worry about this is if we don't have a sense of belonging, if we don't participate, and if we don't participate, we don't see the importance of these institutions that work for all of us. And then it turns into this downward spiral. So I think we're in the beginnings of some of that. You look at what's going on in terms of participation in things like local government, participation in local community events, sport, the religious things, whatever. The participation is falling in all of these things. And these were kind of those spaces of communal engagement. Now, without communal engagement, it's very hard for us to do something for somebody else. We're not willing to take a hit or pay a cost for somebody else's benefit, whether it's somebody else in a community or somebody in a future generation. And so all these big issues that we're dealing with, whether it's climate change or aging population, or whether it's poverty, very hard for us to get those known solutions and implemented because we're like, well, I don't want to fucking do it for those people. I just want to do it for myself. And when the zero-sum mentality kind of takes over, it's really frustrating. But I think there's still hope because in New Zealand, I think there is more in common than there is that divides us, but only if we're able to talk to each other and see that. I think at the moment we're not connecting with each other and we can't see it. Those divisions are quite, strongly segregated. The rich versus poor, the political differences, the age differences, these groups have become very balkanized. And as a result, we're finding this inability for us to share those ideas and see actually, despite our differences, we actually have a lot in common.
Just finally, Shamaville, we had some numbers this week on net migration to Australia and elsewhere showing that that there are 200 New Zealanders a day basically leaving the country to work elsewhere. What would you do to turn this around?
Look, I think we've talked about this before, and I think there are no easy short-term solutions. You have to give people opportunities and reasons to stay rather than what I think we think of as government, which is about stopping people from doing something. So there is no stop here, right? We can't build a wall around New Zealand and stop Kiwis from going overseas. I think, at least in the meantime, what we've got is the ability to kind of bring people in who do want to come to New Zealand. But my fear is that we're not making the most of the people who are coming in. And that ability for us to kind of find that balance of letting some New Zealanders go and having others come in to take their place, that is running at a social license. In the social cohesion survey, only about half of New Zealanders say that immigrants make good citizens. And in Australia, it's over 90%.
Oof.
So I think we're going to be running into some really big issues. The challenge for me is that our immigration of the last decade has been so big, right? The gross inflow of people was about 1.2 million people. We're a country of 5 and a bit million. It just completely changes the shape and face of New Zealand in a very short period of time. Now, you may think, oh, nice to have lots of shamobils around, but when all the shamobils turn up all at the same time, people may not like it so much. And I do worry that what people see is the consequences of the rapid growth in population, the pressures on our infrastructure, the pressures on housing, the pressures on our health system. It's not necessarily true,
it's
but
really interesting.
It's easy to blame.
Shamubu Jakob, the Chief Economist for Simplicity, thank you so much for coming on to the Hoon here on the Kaka.
Thanks for
having me. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thanks, Peter.
Bernard, right. I've got a quick skateboarding dog. Have you got one today?
No, I'm looking forward to yours. I need a cheery story.
Well, I was going to say, it is cheery. It's a really good news story because what we want is more billionaires, really, and we want to make sure that the billionaires are happy. And I noticed overnight that Oracle, the big database company, its shares rose by 43% in a day yesterday, effectively because of huge data center agreements with OpenAI and a number of others. And the most sort of cheering aspect of this is that it's going to mean that Larry Ellison's wealth has gone up by $100 billion to $392 billion as we speak, which puts him very much in the range of becoming the world's richest man after the other charming person, Elon Musk. And it is a phenomenal thing. And what it reminded me of as well is in the yachting world, where Oracle is very big. Oracle was a very big sponsor, I think, of some of the of the America's Cup. And when I used to cover the America's Cup, somebody, a friend of mine, Robo, came up with what the Oracle acronym means, which is one real asshole called Larry Ellison.
That made me laugh, and I'm particularly happy about that, Peter. That's great to see. Thank you very much. That was the Hoon for Thursday, September the 11th. I'm Bernard Hickey with Peter Bale. Ka kite anō. See you next week.